Hey everybody, this is the second week of week 2 stay home, go home, stay home. We've been reading through the book of John. So the passages that we would have read together from the last video would have been John 3:22 to John 4:44. And in here there's two big stories. One is John the Baptist having a conversation with his disciples about who this dude Jesus is and what John's part is to play. And the second conversation is that Jesus has with the Samaritan woman who comes to the well, and they have this really interesting conversation about living water. And she goes and drags other people and says, hey, come and meet this guy. He's awesome. He's great. He's cool. And usually we'd probably head towards that second story of Jesus with the Samaritan woman because it's so interesting. There's so many things that happen in that passage that Jesus shouldn't have done. He shouldn't have been in Samaria. He shouldn't have been talking to a woman. He shouldn't have been talking to this particular woman. And yet she becomes like the first missionary for the Samaritans. She's the one that goes and draws everybody else and brings them back. But what I've been thinking on is this particular little bit, this bit with John the Baptist and his disciples about how they're trying to figure out who Jesus is. And John the Baptist seems to be very sure. He knows exactly who Jesus is. Whether there's been some stories that have been passed down from, his cousin Jesus, whether this miraculous story of his own birth and what he was foretold to be has been trickled down into his brain. John, in the best way, knows his place. He knows what his job is, and he knows who he's pointing to. So his disciples come to him and say, hey, John, this guy Jesus is, well, he's doing your job, and he's going to put us out of a job because, bro. And John the Baptist starts talking to them about how he's the groomsman. I went to a whole smackload of really lovely weddings last year, and I would probably say that most of the work has been done by the bride and the groom. But the groomsmen, well, they mostly just turn up and look handsome. They might have organised the cars, or like the stag do, or they're later going to raise their toast and say, oh, bridesmaids, you look wonderful, and I'm so glad, and aren't you pretty? But mostly the work was done by the bride. Well, in this context, it was done by the bridegroom's best man, sort of thing. He would be the one that would be running between families and doing all the organisation. He would be the one that was setting up the party. It would be even from his purse sometimes that some of this wedding feast would have happened. And he has this really important job of preparing the way and guarding the door, so to speak, that when the bride and the groom finally disappear off after this big party, that he's the one that's making sure that no one's going to bust in and steal the bride away. He's the one that guards the door. So this is a very specific and honorific job that this guy's got to do. He actually, the groomsmen are very, very busy. And so John knows in his head that he is not the groom. He's not the one that gets to go home with the bride at the end of the night. But he's the one that's doing all the work, so he can point and be like, hey, guys, here's the groom. It's great. And so John seems very clear. And in verse 30 of chapter 3, he says to his disciples that he, Jesus, must increase, so he, John, must decrease. And John has been kind of talking about how he is the lamp but not the light. He's the moon but not the sun. And it's a real humble statement from John that in this best way he knows his place. He knows that he is the lamp but not the light, the moon but not the sun. And he knows that for Jesus to go on and do his job, that he must in himself decrease. His work has become less and less so that Jesus can become more and more. And I've been wondering as I go on my little walks around the streets and wave to the neighbours from a safe distance, whether this text is prescriptive or descriptive, which is just another way, another kind of space or angle that we can look at these scriptures with. Is this prescriptive, like the commandments of Jesus? Love the Lord your God, like the 10 Commandments. Or is this descriptive? Is this simply a story that's going on and we need to pay attention to it because it's story, but we don't actually need to take on something from it from our own life? And this verse has just stopped me dead in my tracks. He must increase and I must decrease, because it seems pretty much that it's just descriptive. This is part of the story. John the Baptist knows this has to happen. But also there's this kind of tug at my own life where I'm like, actually, I think this is a bit prescriptive. And we see it a couple of other times. Paul in Philippians 2:17 and 2 Timothy 1:4 talks about how his life has been poured out as a drink offering. Now, Paul is in prison at the time as he's writing these letters, and he knows it's going to end badly. I'm pretty sure he knows this is not going to be a thing that he walks out of this time. And he's saying, look, I've lived a good life and I've lived it well. I've poured out my life like a drink offering, like you'd pour out to God as an offering. Like this is the essence of my life being poured out, that God may be known. And so I've been wondering, as I've been walking and sitting and thinking, like, perhaps this is both. And both is allowed. It is the right answer. It is descriptive. It is telling the story of John's own life, but perhaps it's asking something of us. For Christ to increase, we must decrease. And as I think about that, I've been trying to think about how to suggest this to you as something that's not just a taking away from your own life. How it's not like, oh, well, sorry, here's another thing you have to give up so that God will be at work or seen or revealed in this world. Like, oh, if you don't do that, then this will happen. And I'm not there yet, guys. I think I have to go for another couple of walks, because I know that it's not that. I know it's like, you don't have to cross all these things off your life because then God will be made known or Christ will be made at work in you. But I'm not quite sure yet how to describe it, because in our own sense, we think of this as such a negative. Something has to be given up that I will be more like Christ, or that Christ may be seen more, but it's not the way. And I'm going to keep walking so I can keep beginning to articulate these thoughts, but perhaps you're there already. Perhaps this idea of us decreasing so Christ increases doesn't seem like a giving up or a giving in to you. It's been a slightly longer little paragraph this week, a slightly longer message from the book of John that Shelley's been thinking about, but let me know. Send me your thoughts. All right, bye.